Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. I'm really happy to have a very renowned scholar, my friend, Dr. Kaveh Farrokh from Canada. Hi, Kaveh. Welcome to Razmafsar TV channel.
It's an honor to be on your channel at last. Just on a personal note, I'm an avid follower of your works.
Thank you very much, Kaveh. Our viewers, I'm sure many of them have read your books and articles because I know that many talk about you, excellent works you have done. Your works are extremely important for us, for Iranians, for military history of Iran, because they're groundbreaking, and also not only for Iran, but for everyone who loves Iran. Please give a short introduction about yourself, about your publications, and so on. Who are you, Kaveh?
Well, we can start with the Middle East Journal of Wiley Publishers that was published in 2022. And I'm just going to quote. Military historians who have addressed the trajectory of Iranian military history from ancient times to the present, among the most prominent are Stephanie Cronin, Willem Floor, Rudy Matti, Kaveh Farrokh, Michael Axworthy, and Stephen Ward. So peer-reviewed articles, as you know, book chapters, again, won't take much of the time of your channel and your viewers, but so venues include Brill, Palgrave, Macmillan, Palasch, Zeitschrift für die Militärgeschichte, Organ der Österreichischen Gesellschaft, Heereskunde. So this, as you know, is affiliated with NATO. Naredzia Wojny, one of the top military publications. Hunara, Journal of Ancient Iranian Arts and History. Parse, Journal of Iranian Studies. I'm writing an article right now from the National Museum of Iran, Historia Iswat, Shadet, Fayoum University, where I've had the honor, many of these I've had the honor to co-author with you, Professor. Agon, which is actually based in the University of Marsilia. So I'll just stop there.
Yes.
But one more quote, and I think we're off. But University of Toronto, Faculty of Arts and Science, Elahe Omidyar Mir Institute for Iranian Studies, states Dr. Kaveh Farrokh has authored and co-authored books on the military history of Iran and published articles in internationally recognized peer-reviewed journals. Translations of his works have also been made into Russian, Spanish, and Persian. He's taught history at several universities in North America and Europe, affiliated with numerous academic organizations, United Nations, major outlets of interview. We'll stop there. There are awards and stuff, but there's no need to go into too much detail. This is just a brief sketch before we jump in to our
Many
topic.
thanks, Kaveh. And Kaveh also has written many books next to these academic articles in peer-reviewed journals. And Kaveh, we are going today with Dr. Farrokh, we are going to talk about Sasanian Spah army. And Kaveh, would you like please to share the slides you kindly prepared for our talk today?
Of course. Let's just, this is more of a check-in. So I assume the slides are now visible. You can see them?
Yes. Can you go to the presentation modus, please?
Yes. Let's go to the present. I might have to break slide at one point when I'm making.
Yes.
But let's do that right now. So,
yes.
Everything visible?
Yes. Perfect.
Excuse me. So, this will be sort of more of a synopsis because this truly requires a textbook to address. But it's time to address this, and hopefully we can co-author an article on this topic. But this is a brief overview of the battle tactics of the Sasanian Spah. So the Sasanians typically are said to inherit Parthian assault doctrine. So this would be rapid assaults of armored horsemen supported by horse archery, the feigned retreat and the Parthian shot, although Parthian I'm using in quotation marks because we see evidence of that even with Proto-Iranian peoples in Assyrian depictions. So Parthian shot. The Sabaran, like the Asbaran or Aswaran, if we say that, whichever, there are different ways. Asparam would be the Parthian heavy armored lancers. So the idea was to launch primary battlefield strikes preceded by arrow barrages of foot archers. Now, this is, again, quite simplistic because it's not always foot archers. It could be, like in the Battle of Carrhae, it could be horse archery. So the notion of missile delivery and armored strikes is the core, but there's also a lot of variations, a lot of exceptions, even in Parthian military history. Muqtadir actually, quite a while ago, drew three very good distinctions between the Parthians and the Sasanians with respect to tactics and warfare.
Yes.
It's still valid. Greater emphasis by the Spah on close quarter combat than their Parthian predecessors. A caveat. They were very effective infantry forces in Iran at the time of the Parthians. They just didn't seem to be always integrated with the Parthian military system, as my upcoming book will show, is actually more complex than we thought.
Yes.
So, in general, however, it was more of a doctrinal aspect where the Spah introduced professional polygon combat infantry into the battle order. This is in the beginning. Gradually, these would be superseded by the Daylamites. You and I have authored about this topic extensively, Dr. Khorasani. For example, we also hear of Shapur's gladiator infantry, Mirmilos, very interesting. And of course, Daylamites we just talked about. So the notion of infantry being weak is now being questioned, certainly. So, two was the evolution of armored warfare. For example, we see differences. Shahbazi was the first to point out the differences in armor between the antagonists, the Asbaran and the Savaran. But a lot of this was also influenced as a result of technological developments and warfare, especially against Central Asia. So weapons development also sees the scabbard slide, kind of basically moving towards a lapid system. There's a lot more that can be discussed about this, but it wasn't so binary, so to speak. Different types of cavalry that would be developed. There were auxiliaries, for example. Even the Khazars at one point could be recruited by Khosrow Shirwan.
Yes.
Tactics are topic today. Increased sophistication due to battle experiences, especially against Romano Byzantines and nomadic Central Asian invaders. I must point out that we must not be dismissive of Parthian tactics. They were quite sophisticated as well.
Yes.
The Sasanians continued that development of Iranian cavalry warfare. So, on these brief notes, here's always the question: were the Savaran placed at the fore or the rear? Well, Stransef kind of discussed this question at first. Cavalry placed at the front before the battle commenced, but infantry would play a critical role. In practice, however, it would seem that there were different variations, and the commander would decide on the deployment of various arms of his forces, depending on the opponents he faced. Christensen, for example, a long time ago, talked about cavalry being to the front with battle elephants placed to the rear. Shahbazi has suggested that these possibly were meant to stiffen morale of the infantry. However, there were more functions, obviously, and that is a big topic. So please restrain me if I go off.
No, please. No, it's very interesting. Go ahead, please.
It's a reference, so also another topic. But in practice, there were several types of formations available. So again, this is by no means exhaustive. We're just looking at some highlights. Ammianus Marcellinus, for example, talks about Savaran. So we're talking about man and horse fully armored at the front. Infantry with wicker-like shields would be typical. Battle elephants at the rear. Now, the Strategikon, military manual, now attributed to Maurice, most likely, so this is very valuable because it's corresponding with the later Sasanian era, late 6th century, early 7th century. The reports are very interesting. So the Spah's military formations were being composed of. So there's a left wing, a center, and a right wing. So the center, it talks about 400 to 500, possibly elite troops, placed in the center. Possibly the Schwerpunkt of the assault. Now, what's interesting is that the Strategikon reports the Spah generally lining up cavalry in each unit in the first and the second lines. I'm going to emphasize the word generally. Uyunul Akhbar, of course, this would be after the Sasanians, but again, a very, very, very important sources of information. Specific battle rules for troops. Again, this is kind of like the Strategikon. Again, we hear a right, center, and left. Commencement of battles, for example. So there's a lot of information on how battles commence, numerical factors. Troops experience was very important. Climate geography is another factor. Water supplies. I actually there's an article of mine through academia.edu that readers can access on the role of climate and geography in the battle planning of the Sasanian Spah.
By the way, I just want to add that I read that article. I just recommend all viewers to read that. It's an excellent article by Dr. Farrokh. I know that. Yes, I read it. Yeah, I know which one it is. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, please.
We often consult each other's works, and as you will soon see, your works are now referenced in these slides. So these were in my past lectures. So perfect timing. Kay Khosrow versus Afrasiyab. So this is Shahnameh, actually, which is interesting. So archers are the front line, battle elephants at the rear of the archers escorted by, so this is another type of formation, armored cavalry lancers, spear-armed infantry in New Persian, Nezidaran, and shield and sword-armed infantry, Paigan, later would be Deilamian, placed to the rear of the elephant battle groups. Now, in the Shahnameh, and this, your works have actually addressed this in detail. Karan the Bold leads the charge into the enemy lines with horse archery. Now, this is interesting because when we say horse archer, I'm thinking of the Duro Europos types, the armored types of horse archers, which it's highly suggested that the Parthians had, actually Parthians did have armored horse archers as well, at least towards the end, or middle towards the end. Parthians were there for quite some time. Now, your own works, Dr. Khorasani, talks about what I would call the Schwerpunkt, the V formation, with the heaviest cavalry of the four thrust into the weakest enemy points. Now, this is very, very interesting, and it comes a bit closer to modern military history at the Battle of Kursk, where the Germans had put their Tigers, I believe their Tiger, again, I'm not a military historian of World War II, but so forgive my shallow knowledge, but so you have the Tigers and the Panther tanks, and then flanked by the older Panzer IIIs. I don't know if Panzer IIIs were actually there, but Panzer IVs anyways, at the Battle of Kursk. But the idea is the Schwerpunkt, tip of the V. The wedge formation is seen among the Scythians, Thracians, and of course the Macedonian cavalry, as we know, the conquests of Alexander, of Macedon. Now, the early Sasanian era, there are many examples we can look at. For example, the Battle of Tisfun. Now, there have been suggestions that this battle was not fought at Tisfun, it was closer to modern-day Khuzestan, but the significance of the battle is actually very significant. Herodian talks a lot about this, although Herodian has also been criticized for being flamboyant. But it is interesting, though, that despite being, if I'm correct, a propagandist, he was actually, he did attribute the destruction of Emperor Alexander Severus's invasion forces at Tisfun. Now, the horse archery were quite effective here. So it seems like there might have been a scatter coalesce type of system. So scatter, coalesce, scatter, coalesce. The Mongols perfected this, of course, as you would know. And Mesiche, Barbalisos, and Haran Kare. So those were Shapur's victories. Now, this is again very simplistic and just really highlighting just a couple very broad points, but the Romans may not have been prepared for a new type of combined arms tactics that the excuse me, that the Sasanians were now bringing forward, including professional infantry. This may have been, quote, more of a strategic surprise. But again, we have to remember that Rome was facing several difficulties at the time on many fronts. So we look at the Weltanschauung, as they say. The Savaran Corps were definitely a different force from their Parthian predecessors. And siege warfare was definitely another surprise for the Romans. One of the possible Roman weaknesses may have been their reliance on a lot of auxiliary forces, including Germanic lancers. So these may have been a weak point. Later Roman successes, for example, you see more of an all-Roman force against Narset, for example, towards the end of the 3rd century. Excuse me. So let's have a look at some tactics. The 3-wave attack. So this is actually Julianus Apostata, the reports of a 3-wave attack. For example, so basically you have the Savaran in the first wave, the archers. Now, I would assume these are horse archers because the wave behind them would be Savaran as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a Lancer-Archer alternation.
Yes.
So the first wave strikes with the Savaran. Then these part from the battlefield right to left. Archers, horse archers most likely, engage in missile strikes. These depart, followed by the final wave, presumably to crash through or break through or severely damage the stricken enemy lines. Another example could be a Savaran Pagan tactic. So this is from the, excuse me, Chronicum Annoninum, where the Savaran charged towards the enemy lines, followed closely behind by the infantry. However, as right when they're about to strike the Savaran, they then part, followed by the heavy infantry, who then engage the front lines. So the intention may have been to have the Romans prepare sort of for a cataphract lancer assault to then be surprised by an infantry attack. So this would, of course, because the countermeasures would have to be quite rapid, and not expecting such a strike could be quite surprising. So when we look at the Spah tactics, so now we look at Dinavari or Dinvari and Procopius. So Pigolovskaya's analysis of the Union al-Akhbar, 4-point summary, which is still quite valuable. The cavalry were stationed ahead of the infantry prior to the attack. The cavalry will then either initiate the attack or part to the left and right for the combat infantry to begin the assault. Yeah. Now, the heart is another term for the center, preferably in an elevated position if possible. Again, the geographical factors you're talking about. And the right wing joined the cavalry in the attack, but then they would return to the original positions. Left wing, which is cited as the direction of the shield in the Chronicon Annoninum, primarily defensive, especially versus flanking attacks, entering the battle only under extreme circumstances. So the rear of the formation is considered essential to force, to the force's integrity. So experienced troops could also be placed in this position. Procopius talks to us about the Sasanians' preference to attack around midday or slightly after. Now, despite, now battle plans are typically drafted earlier in the dawn or sooner. Portion of forces there was always a reserve force to be committed by the commander as necessary, as happened at the Battle of Dara, but unsuccessfully. When the elite immortal cavalry, the Javidon, contingent committed to the engagement. So if we were to attempt a reconstruction, broadly speaking. Of course, this is always open to more fine-tuning, but it seems like this could be one model where you have sort of the Sabaran, and then you left-handed archers were actually quite highly valued, apparently, by the Sasanian Spah. And of course, the right-handed on the right flank, heavy infantry, a reserve force commander, and the Darafshe Kaviani, or Darafshe Kaviani in Persian, the royal standard of Kaveh at the rear. So, couple examples, like the Battle of Dara. Very, very good diagrams are provided by Ian Hughes's book, actually Belisarius, the last Roman general, by Pen and Sword. And it's very interesting, without getting into too much detail, what's interesting is, so here we have Hiruz, and Belisarius is here. Now, Belisarius is situated right here. He's built his defenses.
Yes.
And without going into, this is, I strongly suggest looking at Ian Hughes's text, but a lot of good articles there also. But the critical point is where Piruz tries to basically shift the Javidan or Javidan. And what happened, unfortunately for the Spa, was this was a trap. Because you see the shift here by Askan, and of course other forces here. Now, Javidan are trapped. And then what's interesting is the forces that were actually here are shifted. Brilliant tactic. But what's very interesting about the Immortal Guard here is that they literally fought to the last man. So these were highly trained, did not surrender. So this was an example of tactical acumen by Belisarius. This battle deserves a whole probably interview on its own. So I'm being very, very just cherry-picking points here.
Yes,
just
we will
like
definitely do, Kaveh, definitely. Yes.
It's a big topic.
Yes.
The Spah again in battle. So the next round, April 19th, 531. This is the Battle of Kalinicum. Now, this appears in my 2017 book on the Sasanian Spah. So here it's very, very interesting because Belisarius is now here with the Ghassanid cavalry and Al-Harith, Lycaonian infantry led by Stephanicus, cavalry by Ascan, so another veteran of Belisarius, who basically is here with the Byzantine cavalry. There's also Hun cavalry by Simas, led by Simas, and the Byzantine infantry led by Peter. So here we have Sasanian infantry, and then the bulk, but not all, of the forces are the Sabaran, including prestige cavalry units. And this is again conjectural, but most likely they were present. And you have led by Azarethis. Again, this would be the Greek pronunciation of an Iranian name. And the Lakhmids were highly effective, fought in the Sabaran style, led by Al-Mundir. So the battle begins with an archery duel. Now, unlike the Battle of Dara, where Belisarius was able to detect movements, like when the Javidan went, right? Yes. This time, Azarethis seems to be shifting a portion, most likely prestige units, towards the Lakhmid. Now, what's interesting is the Lakhmid then strike the Ghassanids.
Yes.
Ghassanids break and flee, and now the Sabaran attack the Lycaonians and the cavalry. The Lycaonians seem to have been a weak factor there. So basically they break and flee, and now as the Sabaran push, supported by the Lakhmids, the cavalry of Ascan is now also demolished. And now, basically, now Belisarius is now trapped between the forces that were up to now stationary. So the Sabaran are now attacking with Azeratis in lead, and the Sasanian infantry attacked their Byzantine counterparts. A pause, and this is an article that you and I have written for Palash, Dr. Khorasani. If Sasanian infantry were weak, why would they, and I have no idea why the balloons just came up. Zoom seems to have its AI mind of its own. Perhaps there's a hidden message. But a note of humor in the midst of this battle. The Sasanian infantry definitely felt confident enough to confront their counterparts. These narratives are being questioned, so to speak, about weak infantry and so forth. But on with this battle, basically, let's just say they're now hard pressed. So Belisarius, again, a brilliant tactician, because he gives what's called I believe it's called the 90-degree order.
Yeah.
So now basically what's happening is he's pressed between the Savaron and the combined Savaron infantry force. So being pressed there. Now, Procopius tells us that the losses were heavy for the Sasanians, but of course Belisarius lost. Now, if I may break slide for a second, and then I shall return.
Sure.
There were just some points that I had written down that I would like to share. So this is already covered in my 2017 text on the Sasanian Spah.
Yes.
But despite Procopius's description, Zachariah, again, a lot of sources are not often consulted when we look at these battles. Basically, according to Zachariah, the Romans, quote, turned and fled before the Persian attack. Many fell into the Euphrates and were drowned, and others were killed. Malalas, another source, often not cited. Now, the one exception is Professor Greatrix. He actually does compile very helpfully a lot of these sources. Malalas reports that Belisarius fled by boat, while it was Sunicus and Simas who dismounted to join Peter's infantry in trying to hold off the assault. So we're getting different accounts here. Now, Procopius reports that Belisarius joined his infantry to fight off the Savaron, to then withdraw with the surviving troops across the Euphrates. Hughes tells us, and I quote, "It is believed that Procopius did not give the true version of events, possibly in order to defend Belisarius from criticism." So, again, we need to have a panoramic view with the sources. So, in conclusion, some important points. Again, we need to refer to your works. And am I saying this correctly? Katsujinkin Journal. A statistical analysis that was provided by you, the Shahnameh, with respect to the use of weaponry of the Savaron. Lances, spears, javelins, tridents. I highly recommend readers to consult this article. Highly recommend it. Swords, usually for top-down strikes. Notice I'm not going into quoting every statistics, but top-down strikes. Armenian, actually cavalry.
Yes.
Who parallel development with the Iranian world, were renowned for their top-down strikes, actually. And according to some Iranian historians, they were able to, rather macabre, splice the head of the enemy. Maces, often designed for shattering armor, helmets. Lasso, ensnaring the enemy's neck. This is a very old tactic, and then you see this with the Turks, actually. Again, a lot of parallels between the Hun-Turkic world and Iranian worlds in warfare. The Ottomans apparently were quite renowned. Now, I'm not sure if I'm accurate, but I did, because I'm not an expert in this field, but in Ottoman warfare, I think in the battles in Eastern Europe, this is often a tactic that Ottoman cavalry were quite renowned with. Daggers are very interesting. Any note of tendency to try to thrust these into the enemy's neck, for example.
Yes.
Pursuit of the enemy. The Spah was actually very cautious in pursuit of apparently defeated foes. The Sasanians typically, according to Procopius, respected the rights of defeated foes to escape, and they typically had this approach of not trying to destroy the whole of the defeated army. This is interesting because often if an enemy feels desperate and cornered, they might get, as they say, a second wind, and battle quite fiercely. Now, concerns that defeated foes could turn back to ambush the victorious pursuers. Procopius, of course, talks about the Shahnameh. One can only recall Piruz's disastrous wars with the Hephthalites, where actually in the third battle, he lost his life in a very dangerous ambuscade. So ditches and traps is also very interesting, where the army camps would lay out iron traps in places most vulnerable to enemy infiltration or surprise attacks. Basically, this is very interesting because the Romano-Byzantines were often very quick to take advantage of any dereliction by the Spah. Digging of trenches, laying these with traps, and concealing these, very important. Belisarius was actually defeated by such a stratagem in the Thanuris Desert in 528. So a lot of use for defense of fortified structures, cities, and even parts of the long Majna type defense walls. It's very interesting because Sasanian military architecture, as was Parthian military architecture, by the way, were quite effective. In fact, Sasanian military architecture would rival that of the Romans, actually. And when it comes to Central Asia, the walls, the Sasanian walls there, Tamisha and Gorgan, second only to China, basically. So those are some other unknowns. Very interesting. Caltrops were very, very utilized as the Romans would use them. Small metallic round balls, as you know, mounted with the pointed spikes. These could be strewn across the battlefield, in a sense like the old-fashioned minefields, blocking enemy cavalry attacks. Even as late as the Battle of Qadisiyah, these were used by the Spah. So, Scorched earth tactics. So we end on this note. Sasanian commanders were, typically the ideal was to wield numerical superiority if possible. That wasn't often always possible. This doctrine, of course, would have to be suspended if the empire itself was invaded. Iran Shah, or Iran, as they would call, Dinbari or Dinabari. Here is where the Uyun al-Akhbar is very interesting. It's acceptable for the Spah to engage in battle, even if there's a numerical inferiority to the invading enemy. So when the enemy advanced deeply into the empire, now here we have the case of Emperor Julian, 363. So the Spah in this scenario would destroy food sources by burning crops and farmlands to deny these to the advancing enemy. Scorched earth tactics combined with cavalry, so this is raid retreat tactics, highly effective. In fact, Emperor Julian was killed in just such an ambush, just 4 days after his victory. Although it was a tactical victory, they didn't destroy the Spah. But after his victory in the Battle of Baranga. And Jalali, according to Jalali, elite Sabaran units, such as the Dravidan, Jaidan, Poshikban, were instrumental in the Spah's defeat of Julian. Notes can be made of the Safavid era, where highly effective scorched earth tactics were used against Ottoman armies. So this is something also the Shah Abbas even went as far as displacing large numbers of people, in this tactic. So this is a form of warfare that's been well known in the armies of ancient Iran, inherited, of course, in the later Islamic era. And on these notes, we have had a whirlwind tour of Sasanian tactics. And I caution that this is only a survey. There's, of course, this is a much deeper topic, deserving of a textbook, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Um, uh, Dr. Farrokh, what do you think? What is the most important? I mean, I know you cannot ask such question, but what was the core of the military of Sasanian Spah?
Well, when we say core, the core, much like the Parthians, I guess in this case, would be the Aswaran or Savaran, of course.
Yes.
And then within that core are prestige units. For example, the John Separan, for example.
Yes.
And there's even reports
Yes.
of very famous commanders in elite units that were actually very trusted by the Shahanshah. Like, for example, we hear of a Jalinus. Now, Iranian military literature speculates that Jalinus may be a derivative of Julius or Julian, for example, that this might have been a label for Romans or Greco-Romans who had joined the Spa in their allegiance, or even people of second and third generation who may have continued in a hereditary fashion. So there's a lot. It's a very interesting question because definitely we're not talking about a monolith, and also where do we begin and where do we end? Because you have sort of the top royal, I would say regal. I wouldn't say they weren't the Sasanian house, but a lot of these were also Pahlavs from the Parthian era. So a lot of the Pahlavs continued their heritage. The hereditary service was to Iran, basically, Iran Shah. So then we hear of very, very prestigious commanders of the Mehrans, for example, like Bahram Shupin or Shubin in Persian. So then there's talk of Khosrow Anushirwan's reforms. But again, I hesitate to say only Khosrow. These reforms could have most likely began earlier at the time of Kawad or Kavad.
Yes.
So it was really an evolution, and I'm not sure if those were completed, completed, but they were certainly an evolution. An attempt was made to create the Dehkan class, so these would be paid directly, theoretically, paid directly by the state.
Yes.
So this was another force, and
Yes.
I think your works have addressed this topic extensively, where descendants of the Dehkans would continue a lot
Yes.
of Iranian martial culture
Yes.
to the fall
Absolutely.
of Sasanian. So I urge readers certainly to consult Dr. Cross on his works in that regard. So it is again at the risk of sounding like a comedian that you and most people would not know because you're far too young, but his name is Mel Brooks. In the movie High Anxiety. So it's a vast topic. It's just sorry
Yes.
for my little trip down memory lane there. The vastness of the topic is that these units, each of these units most likely have their own military history, and we know that there was a military museum in Tisfu, for example, like the sword of Heraclius, and so those they were all displayed. So let's just say a lot more studies remain to be done to consult sources. There's a lot of potential there. And I think one of the paths forward is that the notion of dismissing infantry of ancient Iran, I think, is now, I would call more of a classicist view. So a lot of these tactics that we now talked about here, these were just the samples that we know. Actually, Ilka Savan has a very good paper on Parthian tactics also, that I urge readers to read. So it does sound that even as we move towards a wrap-up, thought seeds are being planted for more discussions,
Yes.
or as we would say here in British Columbia, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes. Kaveh, may I ask you just to get out of the sharing, please?
Sorry
Stop
about
sharing.
that. I am out.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. It was extremely interesting, very interesting. I'm sure because we would love to have you very often on this channel so we can talk about not only Sasanians, also Parthians, Achaemenids, and Proto-Iranians, also during Islamic period. So we can talk. I know that Dr. Farrokh has done extensive research on different eras of Iranian military engagements, also in the Islamic periods, also up to Safavid, also later Qajar, and also later. So we could discuss about different issues because I think that people are very interested in the military history of Iran because this is a tradition which has been given in Iran, and this is what that we have preserved our national identity and also all these things through centuries. Iran is an old culture, and everyone knows that it's not a country which is just, I mean, very old culture. Let's put it that way.
Definitely, on par with many of the, like we know of Greece and Rome, and assuredly, China, India,
Yes.
and it's also the way Iran was situated, or is situated even now, at the crossroads
Yes.
between Europe, Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia,
Yes. Yes.
a
Yes.
topic to be further explored and expanded.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much, Kaveh, and I wish you a nice day. And we are going to have you on these channels again soon. Thank you very much.
To be continued.
Thank you.